This is politically not working in Trump's favor. At what point are they going to realize that maybe things have gone too far?
Some of those people may disapprove because they want there to be more deportations even faster. You know, we've deported 2.6.
I don't think. Well, based on the poll, hold on, Scott. Based on the polling, we have a lot of polling, especially this week. There's been a CNN poll. There's a Quinnipiac poll. It's pretty clear. They disapprove of his handling of deportations. They disapprove of what happened in Minnesota with Renee Good, and they disapprove of Trump's handling of immigration. If they thought he was doing a great job, they would applaud.
In today's video, Abby Phillip does what real journalism is meant to do. She fact-checks Scott Jennings in real time as a tense debate erupts over Trump, the Insurrection Act, and the push to militarize domestic law enforcement. Here's what that really exposes. When power is defended with talking points instead of law, the cracks show quickly. As Jennings leans on familiar pro-Trump lines, Abby Phillip steps in with something far more disruptive to misinformation: legal context and hard questions. Listen closely. This is the tell. The moment evidence enters the conversation, certainty starts to fade. This exchange isn't just about immigration. It's about federal power, accountability, and whether force is being used to fix problems it helped create. That's where democracy meets denial. Arguments that can't survive scrutiny rarely survive the truth. This isn't outrage. It's clarity doing its job. And clarity has a way of exposing what performance politics tries to hide. If you care about facts, accountability, and the guardrails that keep democracy standing, hit subscribe. Because the truth only works if we amplify it together.
Kind of makeup. He believes that the only way to deal with dissent is to crush it.
Right.
That is not only horrible politics, it is un-American, and it is likely to fail. This is, and they've been building up to this idea that they will create the crisis and then they will solve the crisis by cracking down even harder than the forces that they used to create the crisis. They're asking ICE to do outrageous things. They are recruiting them using Nazi, white supremacist propaganda, hinting to that. And then people see that. People who don't recognize it as Nazi or white supremacists, maybe they just join anyway. But the ones who do recognize it see it as a hint, the same kind of hint as stand back and stand by. And then you put those people in the field. This is not people coming to Washington to protest. These are people being placed in my neighborhood doing horrible things to my neighbors. And when people respond to that, they say, now the problem we created, we will solve with more force. This is a horrible political.
How dare you sit here and accuse ICE agents of being Nazi, Gestapo, and white supremacists when they are enforcing law? You just insinuated that they're apparently recruiting others. You said they're recruiting others, and then it's a dog whistle for others to then apply to that.
Absolutely.
Second of all,
let me tell you what he's referring to.
You didn't see that?
He's referring to posts that have been put out on social media by DHS.
I've seen all the posts.
And on the Department of Labor and on other accounts that have been traced back to white supremacist chat rooms, iconography.
That's the equivalent of Hitler drank water. So if you drink water, you're Hitler.
Did you not see the one?
Well, look.
Did you not see the one with George Washington?
There's plenty of stuff.
Did you see the one with George Washington?
Which specific one?
The one where they were using Nazi. It's hinting at Nazi phrasing over a picture of George Washington. Did you see it? Did you see it? You didn't see it.
Well, what was the Nazi phrasing?
You said you see it, but you didn't see it.
What is the phrase?
What is the phrase?
And you didn't see it. And the reason
no one knows the phrase. How can you accuse them of seeing it? You can't say the phrase.
I don't want to guys. I don't exactly. Everybody stop talking. Just a second. I don't want to go down this cul-de-sac. All I was saying, just in response to your question, is that he wasn't saying ICE agents are Nazis or whatever it is. People have linked back to very specific places where white supremacist ideology is utilized. You can disagree with that, but that is what he's talking about.
Okay.
That's all I wanted to say.
Now to the crisis on hand. Democrats created...
making.
Just can you let it
Really? Because I think it was Joe Biden who opened the border for 4 years and let in not only illegal aliens, but otherwise inadmissible aliens. And what did you think was going to happen when you let in millions of illegal aliens? It means that ICE must then carry out mass deportations because guess what? There are laws in the books. Now the question then becomes, do you care about enforcing laws on the books, or do you think it's okay to just ignore certain laws?
Of course we want to enforce laws on the books.
So that's what ICE is doing.
Obama enforced the immigration laws. He deported millions of people. He wasn't shooting people in the street. He wasn't breaking car windows. His poll numbers didn't collapse over it because he was being overly aggressive and un-American.
It's hard not to notice what Charles Blow and Abby Phillip are really drawing attention to here. A structural pattern that goes far beyond one argument, one panel, or even one administration. We've seen this cycle repeat across history. When governments choose escalation over restraint, they don't bring stability. They generate disorder, then use that disorder as proof that even harsher measures are necessary. Political science has been warning about this for decades. Heavy-handed enforcement, especially when paired with inflammatory rhetoric, doesn't calm tensions. It deepens them. It radicalizes communities, weakens cooperation, and pushes people toward extremes. And here's the contradiction that right-leaning defenses keep skating past. Immigration enforcement has existed under multiple presidents without triggering this kind of national backlash. Under Barack Obama, deportations were high, but they were paired with clearer priorities, judicial processes, and far less performative messaging. That distinction isn't cosmetic, it's foundational. Public trust depends on whether enforcement feels lawful and measured, or theatrical and punitive. When it turns into spectacle, legitimacy erodes. And when legitimacy erodes, authority has to lean harder on force just to function. There's also a deeper psychological reality at play: symbolism. Extremist movements don't usually announce themselves with flashing signs. They thrive on subtle cues, shared iconography, and insider language. Research from organizations tracking domestic extremism shows recruitment often works through ambiguity, offering plausible deniability while still signaling clearly to those who know what to look for. Pretending that dynamic doesn't exist doesn't make it disappear. It just leaves institutions vulnerable to it. Then there's the Insurrection Act, the most serious red flag in this entire debate. This is where democracy meets its guardrails. The United States intentionally separated civilian law enforcement from military power after watching other democracies slide into authoritarianism. Every major domestic deployment of troops, from the civil rights era to the LA riots, came with long-term political and social consequences. Normalizing that response during routine enforcement disputes doesn't just solve today's problem, it creates tomorrow's abuse. What Charles Blow and Abby Phillip are ultimately defending isn't partisanship. It's a core democratic principle. Dissent is not a threat to crush. Force is not a substitute for legitimacy. And when policy shifts from governance to fear-driven politics, the damage doesn't stop at immigration. It reshapes the relationship between the state and the people themselves.
Where are all the Tea Party people who had, the "Don't Tread on Me" signs? Where are they today? This is America, and this is an un-American.
Exactly. Okay, what this law will do, just so everyone understands, if invoked, it will allow the president to deploy the military. We're beyond National Guard here, so Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, into the streets to serve a policing function. Now, historically, we've tried to separate those two, right? For good reason. Posse Comitatus is the Latin phrase, but it just means troops don't do policing. And so the question really is it necessary? Will it help? Is it necessary to send in the military? Will that help ICE do its job better? And look, I grew up with, not grew up, but, in my job professionally, knowing dozens of ICE agents, and they've all been very good, very solid people who want to do the right thing. I made major cases with ICE. I mean, ICE doesn't just do deportation. They make criminal cases as well. So in my experience with ICE, they're not Nazis, they're not racist. But do we need to bring in uniformed Army, Navy, Marines to get on the streets with them? I promise you, ICE would tell you, would say,
I want to make sure we get this phrase in, because the phrase is one homeland, one people, one heritage. Remember who we are as American over a picture of George Washington. And that is a hint at what a lot of people are suggesting is a hint at a Nazi German party thing that said one people, one realm, one leader. Do you remember what the largest Nazi rally ever held in America where it was held.
Have you ever seen a dollar bill that says one nation under God? Have you ever read John? Have you ever read John Jay, who said we were one people with one language?
Madison Square Garden in 1934. Right. And you know what picture was on that stage? George Washington. And you know what the person said when they got on the stage to introduce that Nazi rally? Was that if George Washington was alive today, he and Adolf Hitler would be friends.
Right.
And a normal president.
Let me just make one more note. You were talking, Chris was talking about.
Well, when you call people white supremacists.
It's clear why Ellie Honig and Charles Blow keep returning to institutional guardrails instead of vibes, slogans, or political branding. They understand something that often gets lost in loud debates. Democracies don't survive on energy or intention. They survive on limits. The United States deliberately built a wall between military power and civilian policing after watching other democracies slide into authoritarianism when that line was erased. That wall isn't abstract. It's structural. The Posse Comitatus Act exists because soldiers are trained to neutralize threats, not to protect civil liberties, read constitutional rights, or de-escalate civilian conflict. Those are fundamentally different missions. And history backs this up. Again and again, studies of domestic troop deployments show they rarely reduce violence in the long run. More often, they escalate confrontations, especially in immigrant and marginalized communities where fear and mistrust already run high. Even former Pentagon officials, people who believe deeply in military strength, have warned that normalizing military policing blurs accountability and weakens civilian control. And once accountability blurs, power becomes harder to restrain. That's not theory. That's how democracies quietly hollow out. There's also a reality Brian Lyman can't simply wave away: public opinion. Recent AP and Pew polling shows support for immigration enforcement drops sharply when voters perceive cruelty, chaos, or political theater. And listen closely, because this matters. That decline isn't about rejecting law enforcement. It's about rejecting spectacle over strategy. Americans consistently support enforcement that looks lawful, professional, and measured. What they recoil from is enforcement that feels performative or punitive for its own sake. Symbolism matters here too. Extremism researchers have documented how historical imagery, coded language, and insider references are used to normalize radical ideas without ever stating them outright. That's how propaganda works in the real world, through ambiguity, not banners. Pointing that out isn't accusing every agent of extremism. It's acknowledging how radical movements recruit and signal while maintaining plausible deniability. Ellie Honig and Charles Blow aren't defending ideology. They're defending effectiveness and legitimacy. ICE functions best when it is professional, lawful, and insulated from political theatrics. Turning immigration enforcement into a militarized spectacle doesn't restore order. It erodes trust, inflames resistance, and ultimately leaves everyone less safe, including the institutions tasked with enforcing the law. And that erosion is exactly what past democracies ignored until their norms collapsed. America's strength has never been brute force. It has always been restraint, institutions, and accountability. Abandoning those principles for short-term optics risks consequences that last far longer than any news cycle, slogan, or campaign talking point could ever justify.
Keep quiet.
Scott, you talk a lot about these so-called 80-20 issues. So Trump seems to be on the way to turning immigration into at least a 70-30 issue, not in his favor. The latest AP poll says just 38% of Americans approve of immigration. That's way down from where he started. This is politically not working in Trump's favor. At what point are they going to realize that maybe things have gone too far?
Some of those people may disapprove because they want there to be more deportations even faster. You know, we've deported 2.6.
I don't think, well, based on the poll,
I do.
Hold on, Scott, based on the polling, we have a lot of polling, especially this week. There's been a CNN poll, there's a Quinnipiac poll. It's pretty clear. They disapprove of his handling of deportations. They disapprove of what happened in Minnesota with Renee Good, and they disapprove of Trump's handling of immigration. If they thought he was doing a great job, they would applaud what has been happening so far, and they aren't.
I mean, look, we can debate the polling. Donald Trump flatly told the American people he was going to deport illegal aliens. He was going to mass deport illegal aliens, and that's exactly what they've done. They've deported.
He said he was going to deport the worst of the worst.
Yes.
And they are.
No, they're not.
And so
73% of them have no record whatsoever.
That
is not false.
Look,
and only 3% have a violent crime record.
I finish? I can ask questions and you just talk and you talk.
Oh, so you've never talked over anybody. Thank you, sir.
Okay, so Charles, finish your thoughts, Scott.
Here's the deal. He ran on it, and he's doing it. And he's going to be the president for the next 3 years, and they're going to continue to do it. They've deported 2.6 million people. About 2 million have actually self-deported. Only 600 and something thousand have actually been deported through ICE or Border Patrol or other law enforcement operations. So the vast majority of people who are leaving the country are doing so through self-deportation. To me, the greatest question here is, why does it and why is it that Democrats in the state of Minnesota believe that they should be immune from or not applicable to federal immigration law that has been on the books for years? We haven't passed any new laws.
And again,
we haven't passed
That's
That's
not the question.
It's a misleading statement about how Democrats believe.
Listen to their own statement.
That's not the question at all.
No, it's misleading.
People are responding to the cruelty.
It's
Well, look,
when you
people are
ask for
responding to the
immigration
cruelty.
status, not if you.
When we come back, we'll talk about what Democrats and people in Minneapolis are mad about, because there's some very specific examples that I want us to dig into. So let's push pause.
Abby Phillip and Charles Blow are grounding their position in data and institutional reality, not partisan instinct. And that contrast is the quiet center of this entire debate. When immigration enforcement becomes driven by optics instead of outcomes, public support doesn't just weaken. It collapses in a way that's both predictable and measurable. We've seen this pattern repeat across time. Polls far beyond CNN and Quinnipiac consistently show that voters support targeted enforcement focused on serious crimes, not sweeping actions that disrupt families, workplaces, and local economies all at once. That distinction isn't a messaging detail. It's a governing principle. There's also a numbers problem that keeps getting conveniently ignored. DHS data shows that a significant share of recent removals involve people with no violent criminal record, many of whom were already deeply embedded in their communities. These aren't abstract figures used for debate. These are workers who keep industries running, parents raising families, and neighbors contributing every day. Economists have been warning about the downstream effects for years. Mass deportation strategies don't just remove people from the country. They remove labor from the economy. That loss fuels worker shortages, drives up consumer prices, and hits small businesses hardest, especially in agriculture, construction, and caregiving. And let's be honest about where those costs land. Not on politicians or pundits. They land squarely on working families who feel it in higher prices and reduced services. This is where the political spin starts to unravel. The idea that public disapproval means voters want even more deportations simply doesn't align with real-world behavior. When enforcement is perceived as chaotic, punitive, or driven by political theater, trust in government drops across party lines. We've already seen this dynamic play out. Family separation policies didn't just cause a momentary backlash. They remained deeply unpopular years later because people understood them as cruel, ineffective, and unnecessary. There's also the federalism issue, a structural reality that can't be ignored or shouted down. Courts have long recognized that immigration enforcement works best through cooperation, not coercion, between federal and local authorities. When that balance breaks, compliance weakens instead of improving. Even Republican-led states have quietly resisted mandates that overwhelm local resources, strain law enforcement, and push costs onto communities least able to absorb them. What Abby Phillip and Charles Blow are ultimately pointing to is a familiar and dangerous pattern. Policies driven by grievance politics tend to overpromise and underdeliver. Tough rhetoric may energize a base, but governance requires precision, legality, and restraint. Ignore those principles, and the damage goes far beyond polling. Because when strategy is replaced by spectacle, the rule of law itself starts to erode. And once institutional trust is weakened, rebuilding it becomes far harder than tearing it down. A lesson democracies relearn, again and again, often too late.